and so your siblings and your parents, and it could be your children, and there are lots of different examples of it, but that not having relationships with people and not having contact with people you're related to is much more common than people think that it is. And one of the reasons why it's more common than what we can appreciate is that people don't talk about it because
Mm.
it's a very difficult topic, and it's very hard to admit that you might not be close with your parents or your siblings. You might not talk to them. And there are a lot of reasons why estrangement happens. And I don't know if any of you have had experiences like that, but I thought I would, without going into a huge amount of detail, tell you that my family, there was estrangement. I had very difficult, I had a happy childhood, but I had very difficult parents when I became older and kind of more independent. And they really had a lot of trouble accepting the fact that I was becoming an autonomous adult. I wasn't a rebellious person. I was
Mm.
a good kid, and, and really loved my family and was very close to them. So it was a pretty painful thing to go through. And there was some mental illness and other things that got in the way of my being able to have a relationship with my parents. And essentially, they kind of withdrew from me and got other people in my family to withdraw from me. And
Mm.
a lot of people, you might say, well, what did you do, to cause this? Like, what? There must have been some big fight or something that happened, but there really wasn't. It was just a gradual kind of inability to accept me for who I was as an adult, and we didn't really speak. But they were the ones who essentially caused it, which is maybe not as typical as people who rebel against their parents and maybe don't have contact with them. So it went on for years, and one of the results of it for me, and some of you know, I have four kids, and one of them is psych. Um, One of them for me was just the real commitment to having good, healthy relationships of my own with, I have a great husband. We're very happily married. And we have, we're very close to our kids. And that was very important to me because of the experience I had with my family.
So
So,
can
yeah.
I ask, is there, so you've gone from this situation where you know came into adulthood and weren't able to have a relationship with your parents from that point. So where did your but it sounds like you've been able to create a situation where you can have a healthy relationship with your adult children. What kind of modeling did you use for that relationship? If it not being something that you had with your own parents.
That's a, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Uh, I think it basically came. Well, one thing is my husband's parents were. I was very close with them, and so they were kind
Mm.
of role models in a way of how to
Mm-hmm.
be with adult kids. But I had to sort of figure it out as I went along because you're very right in saying that I didn't have the role models. And I was, and striking that balance between being close to your adult children, but not being intrusive and not being
Mm.
controlling and letting them make their own decisions and lead their own lives. It's a very delicate balance, right? But I was determined to work at that balance and make sure that I had it because I didn't want anything like what had happened to me. And of course, I could never do that to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't a danger that I was going to do it to my kids. But you're right. The role modeling for me was really not there. And so you kind of wing it. Ha! Funny, I should be saying that to you. Wing it If anybody understands that, Poplapo, you would. Um, as I went along, really, that's kind of how it came to be.
Um, so in your and you have talked to other people about this. You interviewed someone recently about this. I'm
Yes.
curious if you have kind of a understanding of, now you say it's more common than people talk about, and so that makes it hard to kind of measure. Do you have any idea of how much more common it is nowadays than
Well,
it was in the past?
the person, well, that I don't know, but the person that I interviewed was a therapist, and somebody
Mm-hmm.
is a therapist, and she also was is estranged from her mother, who has a narcissistic personality. My mother was
Mm-hmm.
narcissistic, and people, if you don't know what that term is, it's everything is about them. Everything is centered around them, and it's very hard for people who have that type of personality to really be empathetic and get out of their skin and sort of try to understand somebody else. Was she? It so happened her mother was narcissistic and mine was. So as she's telling me her story, I was amazed how similar it was. Let me give you an example of something that she said, which really rang true to me. Her mother believed that love was like a pie. Okay, and there was a limited
Oh.
amount of it. And
Mm.
as you sliced off pieces of the pie, let's say I did to be married to my husband, and then when I had kids, as you slice off those pieces of the pie, there's less for the mother. This is how her mother looked at it, and how I
Oh.
think my mother looked. She didn't
Oh.
consciously think about a pie, but she was threatened by the fact that I began to have other people in my life that were very important to me. And that
Oh man.
explains, yeah, yeah,
That's such
very,
that way of looking at love. I can see how that would create really really negative feelings when somebody else has begins to experience positive feelings, like that this idea that love is finite and someone else's relationship with can threaten your own relationship with someone. that's that's such
yeah.
a that's such an unhealthy way to view it.
It's very
um
unhealthy, and it's a no-win because the more you are threatened by it, the worse your relationship with that person becomes,
right.
because you're angry and you're resentful and all those things, which is ridiculous because most people want their kids to grow up and get married and have kids
Yeah,
and
right.
do
Yeah,
all those
and
things.
socially it just doesn't work because, like, human beings are happiest when they have a lot of engaging, like, social interactions. And so if you really love someone, then it's a good idea to promote their connections with other people than trying to cut them off.
Yes, but I do think, and this is something we can talk about, I think just because you're related by blood to someone, and and I believe me, I'm a total, I believe in family closeness and want to try to have that as much as I can. But some people who you're related to may be very toxic to you.
Right.
They may be very um, tearing you down and critical. And when you find yourself in that situation, it's a tough thing, right? You've got to figure out, how do I negotiate this relationship? How do I have a relationship with, let's say, my father, who's constantly criticizing me? I'm not saying this in my case, but I'm just using this as an example.
Sure.
And he makes me feel badly. How do I navigate that,
I
and
From what
remain
I've
in, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I haven't had personal experience with this. Luckily, I've been fortunate. My family is very supportive, but so many people that I know are affected by this, by being in toxic or abusive relationships with their family. And I also see it online everywhere. You mentioned narcissism, and that's a tough one because it's a cognitive disorder that is like counterintuitive to the entire act of parenting, because when you're a parent, to do the best thing for your child, it has to be about them. It can't be about you. But obviously, the disorder makes it so that everything is about you. But
That's exactly right.
there's a subreddit
Yeah.
called "Raised by Narcissists," and
I
if you,
know.
yeah,
Yeah,
it,
Psych told me about that, and I'm going to go to that. I haven't been to that subreddit, but it's because I think people, just like this woman I was interviewing, people have very similar experiences when they're dealing with someone in their family, like a mother who has the same disorder. It's,
yeah.
you think you're the only one going through that. And then you come to find out, no, all these people have experienced this.
Well, there are
And,
so many challenges. Being raised by someone like that, like who you're raised by, contributes a lot to your interpretation of things and your values and everything. And so, for there to be a support system that can help you see that no, this is the healthy way to communicate. This is the healthy way to interact and the healthy way to have expectations of each other. That has like a normalizing effect on the things that are actually good for you, and it can be pretty powerful from what I've seen.
yes. And to get back to one point, which I didn't really address, which is how common it is.
Mm.
So again, the person I was talking to about this is a therapist and has helped many people who've dealt with estrangement. But the statistics are like 7 to 10%. But she thinks it's much higher than that. Her
Mm-hmm.
guess is it's somewhere in the range of 20 to 25%. That's one out of every four families have
Mm.
experienced it. In her case, the other thing that happened was that the unhealthy relationships get passed down from one generation to the next
Right.
if they're not solved and not dealt with. And in
Mm-hmm.
her case, her mother was narcissistic and she pitted her sister against her. And then
Mm.
when she grew up and had kids, she did the same thing with her grandchildren, finding a favorite grandchild, being critical of so
Right.
it just goes on and on and on. And so the question then becomes, how do you break the cycle and what do you do? In my case with my parents, I didn't make the decision not to have contact. They're the ones who made the decision, which
Mm-hmm.
actually was a very good thing for me in a lot of ways because it allowed me to get some distance, and as sad as it was, get some distance and really deal with life on my terms rather than on their terms. And that's how it happened. So I don't know if other people here, um, have had experiences that they might want to talk about. And
Yeah, I know it's it can be a difficult topic, but if you're willing to share, like it would be, we're really willing to listen. And um, I think uh, when it comes to breaking that kind of cycle, I think that's where community support from the bigger social group, not just in your blood family, but in the community at large, whether it's your city or an online community, I think those can really come in handy. For my again, I don't have immediate personal experience with this, but I saw this a lot. One of the places I saw it was that I came from a heavily religious community, and and it was the religion was it was highly socialized into the way everybody was and how families interacted with each other. And so often when a member of the family chose not to participate in the religion, it often led to a lot of negative feelings, and people eventually being estranged from their family due to having value conflicts and conflicts of belief systems. And what I saw when this would happen is if someone was able to, they could reach out to other communities and other groups, and they could find support systems outside themselves um, to help support them, and to, I think, probably give them different types of role models, and teach them other ways of interacting that weren't just based on the toxicity that was inherent in the family relationship.
Yes, and I think that a place like VRChat is a perfect example of getting the validation, the closeness, the friendship, all of the things that you would hope to get in a family. And some people are not that fortunate to be able to get that support. And so you have this community of amazing people who come together. And I think it's pretty, incredible that we're all able to be in this room from, no matter where we are. And I've heard a lot of people talk about really personal stuff in VRChat, sharing experiences and things that maybe it's a little easier to do it in VR than it is, face to face in real life. I don't know. But it's a very good opportunity to sort of create those connections that you
I've
might not be able
yeah,
to create in real life.
I've heard. I mean, I've heard people talk about them being able to find um, places where they're accepted here and where they're understood a little bit better. Can we do a quick emoji vote? A thumbs up or a smiley if you have experienced acceptance and understanding that maybe here in VR or in online communities that maybe isn't as frequent to find in real life. Okay, yeah, yeah. Seems seems pretty common. I think that's pretty powerful, especially because we're so physically distant from each other. But the physical distance is it can be irrelevant based on if we have the methods of connecting with each other that kind of surpass that, which I think is also a bit related to the um, idea we talked about earlier, where the phenomenon of family doesn't have to happen, just through blood relation. I mean, people get adopted all the time, and that's they have their families, but then also, we can go off and create families with each other, and but then I also think that but in between that, I think people can find family with each other as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think too that, to be a really healthy, well integrated person might mean that you don't that you don't have as much contact with your family. It's not necessarily an either or that you either, you cut them out of your life or or with them a lot, but there are certain constraints that you can put on contact if you're finding that it's making you feel badly and making you feel badly about yourself. And that's a hard choice though, because
I'm sure.
so much of our identity and our self-worth is based on, let's say, what our parents think of us or our siblings or
Yeah,
whatever.
well, but by the person you're raised by, I mean, when you're young, your parents are everything. They teach you everything about the world, including the things that you believe about yourself, and that's got to be a difficult thing. Like for people who are kind of struggling with that, I'm sure that that's a huge struggle. Do you have any like advice or resources for people who can't they've been instilled by their parents to believe things about themselves that aren't true? How do they then go to believe something different?
Well, what happens is and it's a good question, you get out in the world. Of course, maybe Cy could answer this better than me because he's the budding psychologist. But I
Mm.
think when you get out in the world, your parents help you to form your identity, right? And you accept that pretty much hook, line, and sinker when you're growing up because you don't know anything else and you can't test yourself against the bigger world. But when you get out in that world, you begin to see that the way other people see you is not necessarily the way that your parents see you and how they view you. And that's okay. But if it starts to become super negative, and if you are there's just a lot of tension and a lot of conflict, you do have to figure out what to do about that. And of course, people seek therapy to try to get that work out those conflicts. And I think part of it is an issue of boundary, so that you can still be in a relationship with your family, if you want. This isn't from my personal experience, but you can still be in that relationship, but you can set certain boundaries of what you will and won't accept, and the same goes for the other people in the family. And I think
Yeah.
accepting those boundaries helps to ease the time you're with them, and helps maybe to get ahead of some of those conflicts that come up.
I'm curious if anybody in the audience has had experience with breaking away from a toxic relationship and learning how to kind of identify yourself on your own terms rather than on the person's uh, oppressive influence. If you do, you can come to the center. If not, that's fine. It's a tough thing. Although I know that toxic relationships they're pretty common, and I think that doing that thing, like establishing boundaries, like that's a really really tough, like that. It doesn't come naturally, especially in relationships with parents, and it's hard to learn without a model, without a role model that you can point at and say, oh, this is how it's supposed to look. But I think that's probably one of the areas that our culture doesn't facilitate very well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that parents do when you're grown up and you are out in the world, your parents sort of have a lot of power to validate you, to give you encouragement, to give you support, but they also have a lot of power to tear down your self-confidence, make you, because they raised you, they've known you since the day you were born. And so that gives them a lot of power. And that can be a good thing, or not such a good thing. And I think one thing is to think about, when you are with your family, do they make you feel good about yourself? Do they validate you as a person? And if not, you have to look at that and figure out, well, what is the problem? What's going on? Why am I feeling so you know, uh, so badly? And there are people who talk about the holidays, over the holidays when everybody gets together, and how that's usually a very stressful time. And I think one of the reasons it's stressful, and I'm just throwing this out there, is that you're coming back to the womb. Essentially, you're coming back to the way you were as a child, when parents were in a dominant role, and maybe it doesn't feel so comfortable now. You're out in the world, you're independent, you're beginning to think on your own, established your own relationships, and when you go back home, it's maybe hard to maintain that feeling of autonomy.
Yeah, well,
Well,
you're a different person.
sometimes it's trying to live up to somebody else's expectations.
Right. And
Yes.
especially when someone's expectations are irrational and unrealistic, like if someone believes that you should only love like a limited number of people, and your love for someone else diminish it. Like that sort of expectation is really you can never satisfy that person. You can never make that person can never validate you because they are irrational about it.
So
That is
catapult,
difficult.
yeah. Sorry. So catapult, talk about that a little bit, since you brought it up, and I think it's a really good point, the idea of living up to someone else's expectation.
Well, I see so many people that will jump through hoops to try and impress somebody else. You know, like you mentioned, a Christmas dinner, like some people will they won't be themselves to try and impress somebody, either family or friends or whatever. Um, Personally, I'm a loner, so I don't have that problem because I am who I am. If you don't like it, oh well, sucks to be you. You know, it's kind of like, but so many times I see people, you know, I know these people, and then all of a sudden I see them when they're like I said, trying to impress these family members or friends or whatever, and they're a totally different person. I say, who the hell are you?
Hmm. Yeah, that's probably pretty common.
Oh,
That's
I
tough though.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Peer pressure, yada yada, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it. But it's just that you're not being yourself. You're not being true to you. Be true to yourself, and if the other person doesn't like it, oh well. You don't need that person in your life.
Yeah. It's a I think it's a necessary thing to learn, but I think it is a tough thing to learn. Again, especially with people who have once been in authority over you. It's hard to break away from that. Um, while we're talking about family, though, I was wondering too. We mentioned earlier about how families will continue these cycles, and they'll have, I have a friend whose history of like toxic relationships, in this case, in the women in her family, like they just go back generations. Like all the moms, all the aunts, all the grandmothers, like they were all uh, kind of participating in this toxic family culture, and
Wow.
coming from that environment, um, it's like in order to stop the cycle, some sort of action is necessary. Do you know? I mean, if someone, for instance, like has narcissistic tendencies, how do they? When can they learn how to manage those? I mean, is it just therapy? Is that the only resource? Like, where do you think that they might be able to learn how to handle that?
Well, narcissism, supposedly, I'm not trained as a psychologist, but narcissism is one of the most difficult personality disorders to treat. And part of the reason is it's so self-referential. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
person is so into their own world and seeing things in from their own perspective that in order for them to get better, they would have to step out of their bubble and begin to see the world the way others see them and begin to have empathy, which is very difficult for a narcissist. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't, in my mother's case, I mean, she was never able to do that. I don't think she ever could do that. And I guess that's maybe where a little bit of compassion comes in when you realize that this is a closed loop. But that doesn't really completely answer your question. I mean, I think one thing is, like you mentioned, that subreddit raised by a narcissist. I think if people are having trouble getting along with someone and they read that, wow, all these people have had this experience, and it's exactly the experience that I've had. And so being aware to be able to identify and label something that you've been coping with, you just think it's your weird, you know, mother or or your father who's impenetrable and you can't do anything about it. Then you read and you find out, well, wait a minute, that person is, they are narcissistic, and that you're not the only one, that a lot of other people have had this experience. And I think it's helpful you ask, how do you break out of it? I think the first step is to recognize the problem, to be able to have insight into what the problem is, that it's not just because I'm their child and I'm not living up to it. Because for me, a lot of it, I had a lot of anxiety about it, for a period of time. And I kept thinking, well, if I could only come up with the right solution, if I could
Mm-hmm.
only act a certain way or do a certain thing to make the problems disappear. So that meant that the pressure of trying to come up with a solution was totally on my shoulders.
Right.
And over time and with help, I realized, no, it's not, it's not up to you to solve it. This is something that's
Yeah.
outside of you.
In a
Yeah.
healthy adult relationship, both parties in the relationship have a responsibility in it. It's not one-sided. One person has to please the other. It's a
That's right.
mutual exchange.
Well, my husband has
Actually,
a saying that, yeah, I'm sorry. Who was,
oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Dave. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just
No,
going to
what?
say, make one more comment, and that is that my husband has a great way of expressing what you just said. And what he says is relationships are determined by the person who wants the least.
Who wants the least?
Wants the least. So if two people are in a relationship, whether it's parent child or husband wife or whatever, and one person wants less than the other person, they will define the relationship because it will be limited to the person who wants the least out of it. Very interesting.
Can you apply that to your relationship with your parents and kind of, yeah, what does that look like for
Well,
that?
in their case, it wasn't that they wanted the least, they wanted it on their terms. So they wanted, and I do believe that nothing I could have done would have pleased them, would have made them, would have satisfied
usually,
them. There was, just
yeah.
an endless list of things. So in
Right.
their case, I don't know that it exactly applies because they were, not emotionally healthy people, number one, and number two, that they were insisting that I do and be something that I just could never be. And I don't know if that really answers the question. It's a little bit different, but even with you have a good friend, you want to
Yeah.
make that friendship closer. Even in that case, or a brother or sister, and you want to get to a deeper level of a relationship. But if that person doesn't want it, if the other person doesn't want it, and they're blocking it off, and they're walling off certain parts of their personality, then there's nothing you can do. You can only take it so far, and
But
I think
that,
yeah.
that's part of the boundary thing, though, too. Like the other person gets to set their own boundaries, and they say, "Okay,
They
I'm not."
do.
It doesn't go beyond this
They
point.
do. That's true. They do. But the boundary setting, I was talking about boundary setting in terms of what you, that you're not going to let someone mistreat you, and you're going to, you're not going to let somebody treat you without respect, that kind of thing. But you're right. The
Right.
boundaries can be healthy, and boundaries can separate people too, and it all depends on the particular circumstances.
Right. I was close to someone once who demanded um demanded the impossible of their child, and so they had their boundary had to be you know to step back and say, I'm not going to do anything that you ask of me or tell me, and that's my boundary, because you like, there's nothing, you demand the impossible of me. And so, like, it's unfortunate when that has to happen, but that is one of the steps of getting out of an abusive relationship, is saying, here's what I will allow, and then here's what I won't allow. And
So what happened in that example?
well, actually, I uh unfortunately wasn't they weren't in my life for a while after that, so I never got to see the end of the
I
story.
see.
I'm
Okay.
not entirely
Yeah.
sure. But I think they went on to explore their own identity in positive ways. Catapult, you had something to say earlier?
Yeah, this thing about being narcissistic. My guess would be a lot of people that were only childs.
Yes.
Really?
It's interesting that you say that, because my mother was not only an only child, she was an only child of an entire generation. So none of her She had aunts and uncles, and none of them had kids.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So
no cousins, no siblings, no nothing.
nope, you're absolutely right. And in fact, the person that I interviewed, this therapist I mentioned earlier, her mother, who was narcissistic, was the only child of a generation, just like my mother.
Yeah. Well, I'll
So
give you an
you
example
hit it
because
on the head.
in a way, I'm
Yeah.
an only child. I got a sister that's 11 years older than me. My brother's 10 years older than me. And when I got to be a teen, I finally came up to my parents and said, "I was an accident, wasn't I?" And they said, "Gee." And they didn't want to answer that, but they did say, "Yeah." So I said, "Dad wasn't a good railroader, and he didn't pull out on time, right?"
Oh my god.
Oh no.
But but what happened is because the huge gap, minimum 10 years between my brother and myself, they would go off
Yeah.
and do their thing while I was at home playing with my toys by myself and whatnot. Yes, I did have a few friends when I was a little kid and whatnot, but most of the time keep to myself and I'd play with my little toy soldiers or whatever toys. And I really looked after my toys, and that's how I developed my imagination and whatnot. But like you said, the narcissistic part, and I kind of call it uh, whatever you call it, self-aware, whatever, kind of selfish or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't try to, but I often find myself talking about myself, and I don't try to. And to this day, I'm still the same. I'm still totally socially dysfunctional. I'm still a loner.
Well, I don't
My
think you're
wife,
totally just, yeah.
Hey.
well, like
You,
people get together, start talking about like guys will start talking about sports, football, baseball, blah blah. I'm not into any of that crap. You know, it's
Well, it could be a cultural thing.
you know,
But
Sports
but
too.
you mentioned self-awareness though, like that's really the main tool, I think. Yeah, like you were talking about earlier, when someone wants to break the cycle, they have to be aware of the situation they're in. They have to be aware of their own emotional patterns, and once you're aware of your own behavior and aware of what your mind is doing with information and what your perceptions are telling you about people, until you can kind of recognize that, once you can recognize that, then you have the power to navigate it. If you don't have names for things, or if you don't understand, if you can't see the patterns happening, then you're just flying blind, and you won't be able to negotiate with your own emotional state to learn how to operate, to be functional, to learn how to cultivate healthy relationships. And so it's a highly necessary tool.
that's a good point. But I think, family, and particularly your family of origin, meaning your parents and your siblings, um, have a lot of power um, over you in certain ways. I mean, I say this because, you can be friends with someone or a group of people, and you can kind of drop out, uh, and there are no real repercussions, long-term repercussions. It's easier to disengage in that kind of situation than it is to disengage from your family. And I'm
Right.
certainly not suggesting that people do disengage with their family, but it's working at this balance between
Yeah.
wanting to be close and with your family, and wanting to be a healthy
Right. Like
autonomous adult.
the influence that they do have in your life, it can lend itself either to a positive support system where they can provide a tremendous amount of support and love, or it can lend itself to a lot of negative influence. And so yeah, I ideally there should be a balance between people, but when it comes to abusive and toxic relationships, sometimes it's not worth the influence of that toxicity.
That's right.
Did I see a comment from over here, Agent? Did you have one at all, or were you just?
Yes, I did. I did have a
Yeah.
question. Because things that all three of you were saying, interestingly to me, involved different hereditary configurations that can determine personal boundaries, that can determine the other context of boundaries that you mentioned of things that separate or confine people. And I'm interested in how technology may have influenced or changed that. Like I've been around for as long as the age of the internet, and I wonder if the experience that people have with the configuration that you were speaking of, being an only child, is that the same kind of being an only child if we're completely networked, if we
I was
transcend.
I was thinking
I'm
about
sorry, go
that
ahead.
too, actually, because like the phenomenon of being an only child, like it's much more stark in the modern civilized world. I think there was an old like saying once that it takes a village to raise a child because all the children in a village used to be part of the same group, and like when you're in a smaller tribe that we evolved in, uh, then everybody is basically part of the same family, and everybody's in there together. And so all the other kids and all the other family members, you're just all in there communally. But we definitely don't have that anymore. Like families are relatively very isolated from each other unless they take specific steps to involve themselves in community. And even then, like at the end of
Hereditarily
the
speaking,
day,
right?
that what, hereditarily speaking, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, when you reference family in this instance, you're talking about family in the biologically or genetically
Right.
connected sense, right?
Yeah, the nuclear family like arrangement of where you've got the parents and the children, and they all live separated in their own houses, and they all they raise their kids in their school, but I think in a lot of ways culturally, families can develop their own culture that might be isolated from another family's culture.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
I
Well,
so
I
Agent,
I think
I just
technology really messed up the family.
oh,
Yep.
But
well,
I
Agent,
guess that is my
yeah.
question, although I don't know that I come down necessarily on that side. Um,
what
Oh, I
what were
can
you
give
saying,
some
Mitch?
examples.
Kurt, you were going to say something.
Oh, me?
me?
Is it
Oh,
Kuro?
Kuro,
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Kuro.
Kuro.
Okay, so I
I'm
guess yeah,
sorry.
I would probably am a narcissist, but I do have empathy and like I do like help people and coach them, right? But yeah, I was originally an only child, right? So I guess I can somewhat relate to that.
Okay, yeah, that's another
Uh-huh.
another one in the same pattern.
Well,
Matt,
do you think that Kuro, do you think that that being raised as an only child, I mean, only children actually are very successful people statistically. They're very high achievers.
Mhm. Yeah, I am.
mhm.
Yes,
Uh,
I'm pretty much an overachiever, IRL and in here. So,
You don't have
yeah.
to raise
yeah.
your avatars. Make a mat list.
Oh,
uh,
I'm
I
curious,
partially
Kuro,
atlased it.
how
What's
your
up?
how technology might have affected. You mentioned how you relate to people and whether you can emphasize has or
Yeah.
empathize. Has technology had a role in that at all?
Yeah, I guess yeah, a little bit, yeah, because like I've broken down in VR like multiple times, right? And like I've seen some of my friends break down in VR, but like I can like relate to them too, right? So
So
When
you
you
can
say
um,
find
breakdown,
connection.
do you mean
like
emotionally? You say,
exactly, yeah, like I've
yeah.
had like mental breakdowns in VR like multiple times, like in front
Hmm.
of people. So
And you've
So
been able to
that's an
get support
example of
from people.
yeah,
Agent,
technology circumventing the boundaries that were
exactly, yeah,
Right,
separating
right.
people.
yeah.
are you saying, Kira, that this is a good thing in the sense that it's helping you to kind of connect to other people?
I guess yeah, because I don't really go out much.
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, so I basically go to work, come home, get in VR, or go in Blender Unity all night, right? So I don't really go outside much unless I have to go to work or get food. So
So if you didn't have VR to go into, you would probably feel, maybe you would feel more isolated.
I guess yeah, 'cause I used to like play a bunch of other games before, but then like I spend more time like in here than anything else right now. So
Yeah.
At Catapult, I'm interested in just one example of how technology can be isolating.
Okay, well now you take nowadays, everybody's got their own personal little tablet or cell phone, and they're sitting in each corner of the living room. Nobody's talking to nobody. They're all on their little tablet. Where at one time, everybody would either gather around the television set, watch the same show, so they had a point of reference because everybody's watching the same show, and they'd talk about it and whatnot, whether it was a sport or a comedy show or whatever. Same thing at the dinner table. Nowadays is everybody's being isolated with these devices, and like
Well,
how many times do I go out? People walk out of Walmart, they got their face in their phone, they're not even looking. They cross the street, they're not even looking. Man, how many
okay,
times I've
but
had to jam
when
the brakes
people
on, you know?
when people are on these devices, aren't they talking to other people? Aren't they interacting with others?
Not necessarily. Sometimes they're playing a game, or sometimes they're just doing whatchamacallit,
Browsing
YouTube or
Facebook or
web
whatever,
browsing.
yeah. Mm.
Well, it's a weird thing. Like, I think it's mixed. I think it's brought people closer together and separated them more at the same time.
Agreed.
Because if, it's sort of both. And I think one thing that happens is it makes the physical togetherness, the physical presence, not as important, right? So the fact that you're not communicating with people you're physically with at the time is one downside of it, but the upside is that we can all be together here in this room, right? Talking and
Oh, agreed.
interacting. Yeah,
When I
so
was
it's a
mentioning a
weird thing.
family, yeah, when I was mentioning a family, it's more the impact on the kids, the small kids and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I see
you
that
know,
too.
being an adult,
Yeah.
VRChat is probably the best thing that's ever happened to me because I get to come in here, even though I have absolutely nothing in common with anybody because I'm too bloody old. The generation gap, people will start talking about these anime type shows and whatnot. I haven't the slightest idea what they're talking about. They'll be talking like they'll have avatars of game characters. I'll say, "Hey, that's really cool. Yeah, it's this character from this game." I said, "Okay, never heard of it."
But interestingly,
You're,
even though
you're not
that may
alone.
be the case, you're
I know
still
those feels sometimes.
interacting and you're in here, right?
Well, yeah,
So
yeah.
you're
But like I say,
connecting.
most
Yeah.
of the time I walk in, I say hello to everybody. Everybody says hello. Then I just stand there and listen to people talking.
Okay, I appreciate your input. I don't want to get too off topic. It looks like Freeman has something to say.
Oh yeah, so getting back on the family stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I've got a weird situation. Well, no, it's not weird. It's something hasn't been said yet. Because
Okay.
even though obviously I'm from UK, but my like pretty much both sides of my family are originally from Hong Kong. And obviously
Mm-hmm.
after World War II and all that shit, no one liked that, and everybody emigrated. So my mum's side went to like the Netherlands, Holland, but my dad's side stayed. My dad's side stayed in Hong Kong. So it's kind of weird now because half my family obviously all moved together
Mm-hmm.
to Holland, and
Yeah, I mean, I
they
guess
have
sometimes
like a
estrangement can
yeah.
just happen through physical means where, families are separated.
Well,
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
see, Freeman, do you see the family that's not physically near you? Are you able to
Yeah.
connect
I
with
mean,
them? And yeah.
yeah, I connect with them when I see them, but obviously my family in Holland, they've been there for like decades now. But obviously, because that's literally all of my mum's half of all their cousins, everything, all my mum's house cousins. But they have a bond that I'll
Mm.
never have because
Mm-hmm.
my mum was the only one who said, you know what, nah, not going to Holland. Met
And
my
how has
dad,
she handled
and
that? How has your mom handled it?
yeah, I mean, she's still the eldest in her family, and in Hong Kong culture, being the eldest means like, you're number one kind of thing. But it's still, it's easier for her really because the respect is always there in Hong Kong
Mm.
culture.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But still, it's not. I've got, I love going back to to visit my cousins in, you know, in Holland, but it's never the same because
No.
they've had a bond since like pretty much birth. All my cousins. So, you know, I mean, that's the difficulty, you know, I always find when I go back to visit them because, you know, they're always, you know, they all speak Dutch, you know, they're all like, you know, they meet up like every other weekend, like as cousins and stuff. And then there's
Yeah,
me,
it's
not
not
like,
like this national divide.
Yeah. It's not the
yeah,
same as being together because I have a nephew who's in Hong Kong. I'm in the States, and he has a family. And so I've made a lot of effort to keep in touch with him. It's definitely not the same thing as being there, but, you know, we chat, we video chat, we find these ways of kind of connecting to each other, but it takes a lot of work, you know?
I don't want to interrupt, but we're nearing the end, and there are a couple people behind you, so I'd like to get to them. Thank you very much for sharing your situation
Thank
with
you.
us. Rose, if you'd like to say something.
Yeah. Okay. So earlier, you guys mentioned that a lot of the narcissists you seem to have known have been only children, whereas I actually have a conflicting anecdote here of two of the
that's
biggest
good.
narcissists I know being middle children in families of 3 or more.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Those narcissists actually being my mother and my sister, who,
Hmm.
lo and behold, my sister was the favorite.
Oh,
So
I see.
what happened there is, I think what happened was the mother narcissist being the middle child, and I don't think this was on purpose, but being the middle child fed into her middle child's narcissism and made her feel like the most important thing in the world without even thinking about how she was ignoring everything else in the pursuit of her middle child.
Well,
And
you bring up a good point too, that correlation is not necessarily causation. Like, whatever the situations are that cause narcissistic tendencies, probably has some, might have something to do with being an only child, but there can also be other situations as well that can cause such a thing.
So that sounds like it might have been kind of tough for you.
oh, absolutely, because in that situation, I don't have a dad. I never knew him, and I've never been interested in it. So that never affected me too badly.
Mm-hmm.
What did end up affecting me was the person who tried to fill those shoes, which was my sister, thinking that she was supposed to be a parental figure towards me, and thinking, just imagine a 13-year-old girl trying to raise a 7-year-old something boy. It's
Yes.
a lot of yelling, a lot of physical interactions that aren't pleasant, a lot of all that sort of things, and none of it was stopped by the mother because that's her favorite. She
So how is it now
wants to let her
that
do that.
How is it now that you're all grown?
Now my sister still thinks she controls everything around her. She has the say in her household, which has led to financial problems as well as a lot of shouting and yelling. Whenever she comes around and interacts with me or our mother, which great backfire, she's constantly harassing our mother now. But whenever she comes by, it's always, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You're still doing that? Hey, what even is this? Everything, if it's not about sports, being outside, or 100% productivity, she has none of it. Everything has to be 100% to her specs. And now she has a daughter, which extremely worries me.
So it sounds like you have some awareness of the situation, which hopefully can lend itself to you being able to create a different kind of situation for yourself.
Oh, absolutely. The problem is, I myself am okay. I think I struggle with a bit of an ego because of these two people who I ended up subconsciously putting myself a tier above them because I didn't act like them. So I deal with my own ego over that. But my only worry now is before I leave, what can I do to make sure they don't destroy themselves? Specifically, more my mother, because I'm still with her right now, despite being out of high school and all that. My only worry is how to help her, because despite being a narcissist, she is a self-loathing narcissist, and that's something I wanted to bring up.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always say therapy is a good thing, but whether you can get people to, to actually go to a therapist that can be tough. But it's, but you sound like you have a good grip on things and came out pretty well when you consider the challenges you had growing up.
That's something my aunts mention. Every time they compare me to her, it's how did that happen? How did this happen? They're very confused, especially with how my sister did it.
You should feel pretty
absolutely
good about
do.
yourself. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
That's
thank
where
you
the
for
ego
sharing.
comes from. Yeah.
Well, it's okay. Ego is not bad.
Yeah,
Ego is not a bad thing.
Yeah, that can be something to learn how to navigate too. Tengu.
Hi.
I can understand where Rose is coming from, where my mother is also a middle child. She was also very narcissistic, and she had her way with a lot of things. We moved houses when I was small. About every 2 years, we keep going bigger and bigger, and we also had a lot of overseas trips, and it placed us in very deep debt, but we're still working out of. Fortunately and unfortunately, she's not in this world right now. And she was a middle child as well. She was quite doted on, and I was going this. I think she kind of rubbed off on me. I'm still working with my narcissism and trying to understand another person's feelings and another person's needs. So I try to place myself under them so as to not to get in their way in a sort of in a sense.
And
but you see,
I had a question about that earlier. Like, what kind of how are you learning that? What kind of resources and support do you find helps with that?
Mostly social interactions. Before VRChat is mostly with my friends, and now with VRChat as my daily social interaction gets more and more. I start to realize things. I start to realize a lot of things.
It
about
sounds
myself.
like you're doing
Yeah.
It sounds like you're doing a really, really good job of kind of trying to look at yourself objectively and improve the things that you want to improve. And my God, that's great. I mean, we all, if everybody did that, it would be a much better place to live in.
But the problem is doing it too much. You end up being very self-loathing, and you devalue yourself a lot. So that's
there has to be a balance. You can't just have compassion for other people. You also have to have compassion for yourself. That's an important thing to learn.
That's the point I'm trying to learn now.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the step I'm trying to take now.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Lyko, I apologize. We're about nearing the end, so we can't have any more questions. Oh,
hello.
Hi,
sorry, I kept having to go FK. I was supposed to be in line a little earlier. I guess maybe to end on a note that's more a little endgamey, but I was listening on the stream earlier because I was running late. But at one point you talked about like interactions in here being something that's separate from real life, and being able to get something in here and not be able to get it in real life. I think an important distinction that I like to make about the internet, or I guess it's not so much a distinction as it's trying to remove a distinction. It's that the internet, when you're connecting with people on the internet or in VR or in the metaverse or whatever, it's not not real life. It is part of real life. It's just a communication medium. What it is the ability to connect with people and find people to connect with that aren't in your immediate physical space, right?
That's true.
So,
yeah,
and that's
a good point.
That's what a lot of these people have been describing tonight. Is I don't get out a lot. I can't get around, or don't have the means to, or I'm stuck with a family that I can't deal with. But when I'm here, I'm online, I can connect with people at a greater distance and find more people that are more, I don't know, akin to me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is part of the reason, and it's kind of silly, but I think this is part of the reason that the slang term or the fun term that people love to throw around these days, fam, like, I got you, fam, that kind of stuff. I think that's risen because of that feeling of being able to find kinship at a distance, not fake or virtual kinship. It's just extended distance kinship, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just as meaningful, just as real. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's even more so in VR, and I think a lot of people are able to like get past that thing of, oh, it's virtual, once they're in VR with people and they realize, oh, it's just at a distance. We're still, I don't know, we're still human. We're still real. This isn't fake, you know? So
That's
Right,
very true.
exactly. I hope we can continue
Well put.
to connect with each other. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming and sharing
Thank you
with us
so much.
and
Yeah.
help supporting all of our connection with each other by doing this too. So thank you.
Appreciate all the comments and people's
I'm gonna turn
input.
off the security. Oh, let's play an outro. All right. All right. The security should be off if we want to do a picture.
yeah.
Stage picture.
Yeah, let's do a picture.
Oh, okay.
Come on, okay, guys. Hi, Keith.
Hi. Hey there.
Let me get
Oh. All right.
Okay.
Oh, we didn't have anything to say. Say, I got you, fam.
I don't think that works in VR, bro. Forgetting about this.
Yay.
All right.
Sweet.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Hey, Lyko, sorry, we'll have to get you next time.
Yeah. Do you think? I'm just gonna ask you. Do you think poor people should have families or something?
What? Say what?
I was going to ask if poor people should deserve having families because if you can't afford them, why do you should have them?